I'm Jess.
And I'm Taryn.
And this is the Extra Lucky Podcast. Inspiring change,
Shifting narratives,
cultivating joy.
So welcome to the Extra Lucky Podcast. I'm Taryn, and today I'm joined by Michelle Fruhschien. Michelle is a wife and mother and special educator. She started her advocacy website and social media handles to bring more awareness to her daughter and their peers with rare disease Jordan syndrome. As a special educator, it blossomed into a larger umbrella and speaking out and bringing light to disability in general. Life can be so hard, so also bringing humor into our everyday struggles is the way Michelle finds her silver linings. So welcome, Michelle.
Thanks for having me. It's so good to see you.
Michelle, everybody knows Michelle, right? Michelle's been part of the Extra Lucky Moms community since I think one of the very first days. She's one of the contributors in Dear Mama, Stories of an Extra Lucky Life. A fierce advocate. I'm so excited to just dive in today, Michelle, because we haven't actually caught up in a while. So I'm curious what's going on in Hallie's world and the Jordan syndrome world and all of that. But let's go back to the beginning. Can you tell everybody a little bit about your family and kind of how you got to where you are today? You go into a lot of detail in Dear Mama, so you don't have to kind of go back, in that level of detail, but tell everybody your family story.
So, as Taryn said, I'm Michelle. I am so lucky that we connected in the beginning of, I guess, both of our journeys, really starting our advocacy. Hallie was born right before COVID, kind of shut the world down. So, that's when, my world really drastically changed. And after months of trying to figure out what was going on, we got a rare diagnosis of Jordan syndrome. And at the time, under 200 people globally, I really had no idea what to do and, kind of where to channel everything. And that's when, I stumbled upon Extra Lucky Moms and social media and just this wonderful outlet to really create this community for selfishly myself to kind of navigate a lot of this, isolated emotions, but also really to find community and support just in figuring out what my daughter needed and what we needed moving forward as a family. So, it's been really such a crazy journey, but it's been different and beautiful and exciting, and it's still continuing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to just touch on that you got this diagnosis and they're like, hey, there's only 200 other people in the world that have it.
Yeah.
That, it's one of the kind of easier things about getting a Down syndrome diagnosis is that, it's a very common disability and you kind of immediately step into this community of, thousands, millions of people. But I'd imagine that this tiny but mighty community was just as strong. So talk to us a little bit about that as far as how, the support that you found from the Jordan syndrome community.
So when Hallie's neurologist actually gave us her diagnosis, she literally gave us a packet of information, anything she could scrape up on the internet. And the one thing she said to me is go on Facebook. There's, a Facebook group, all these families, and it looks like there's this beautiful community. And that night I joined and I woke up the next morning to hundreds of messages welcoming us, sharing pictures of their kids or teenagers, and just saying we're here for you, anything you need. And this community has really, truly been everything that we needed. And we actually have a conference coming up in, I think, about 3 weeks in Boston. So just to see, our extended family is going to be truly amazing and kind of see the research team and see where we are with, clinical trials and everything that's coming up. It's just been phenomenal to really have this global family that, maybe, sometimes I talk to one of my friends in China and she's going to sleep and I'm waking up, but we have such a strong connection that you don't really truly realize how important this community is and just how important social media is, because it really does bring people together when, you may not have a neighbor or a close friend that really understands what you're going through.
I realize we totally skipped over what Jordan syndrome actually is. So do you mind just explaining to everybody, what it is and what it means for Hallie?
Sure. So Jordan syndrome is an ultra rare neurological disorder, and it truly does affect each individual pretty differently. I mean, there's a lot of common symptoms such as hypotonia or low muscle tone, which really is one of the strongest indicators that I notice about Hallie. Um, Seizure disorder affects about 33% of the population. cognitive delays, some vision issues, and then overall global developmental delays. Really, but each individual is on their own path, and that's one thing that I think as a special needs mom that you kind of have to be okay with and kind of accept that your child's journey is their journey and they do things on their own time. And you can't compare your child to anyone, even when you say, oh, my child has this syndrome. Like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, your child is still an individual, and that's something that I think I had to kind of grasp and really accept as a mom.
Yeah, so that was what I was going to ask, was that, you find this community, and was it hard on both ends to not, to keep that in perspective, that you have to look at her journey and your journey as an individualized one?
I think just as a mom in general, especially if you've multiple children, like, just the natural tendency to compare Haley to even my older son, Noah, who is neurotypical, and just looking at the pictures when she was born and comparing, like, why isn't she doing this? I think that was kind of the first thing I needed to get past. And then, like, being introduced to the community and then just making sure I wasn't comparing Haley's milestones to other kids. And should she be doing this because another child her age is? Like, no, like, I needed to accept that she may not, and she may do it at a different time. So I think that that's one of the hardest things and I still struggle with that some days. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't, but I think just comparing in general is so hard. And it's something that we should try to stay away from, because it can be difficult.
Yeah. I I think I think you can keep it in focus on a day-to-day basis, and then something throws you off. I always say, like, and I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, birthday parties can be hard for me
Hmm.
because, if she gets invited to a birthday party of neurotypical peers, it's really where I'm observing the difference
Yeah.
on a different scale. Like, you go to a playground and kids are all different ages. You really don't know what your kid is doing versus what another kid is doing. But sometimes it's at these birthday parties, and I don't not go to them,
Right.
because she has a blast in her own way. Like, she has a blast, but it can be hard because you're like, oh my gosh, they're all the same age. And
Yeah.
you see sort of some of the gaps widening, and it's okay. It's not like I leave them thinking like something's wrong with her. It's just hard as a mom sometimes. It
Right.
creeps up. You can be the biggest advocate in the world, and these feelings still creep up, and they're still okay.
Yeah. I think that's so important to acknowledge that, like, you can advocate for your kid until the end, but it's also okay to have your days where, you don't feel okay or something bothers you. And I think that's kind of like my whole purpose is I don't want to put this facade out there that, like, every day is hunky dory, and, because it's not, there are days where I'm down about something. And then you have a day like today, I dropped my son off at camp, and my mom was watching Haley, and she sends me a picture of Haley sitting straight up by herself. And she's like, I just turned around and she was sitting up. And she was like,
Incredible.
Haley, oh my gosh. And Haley looked at my mom like, can I help you? Like,
Yeah,
this is
she
normal. Like, this
probably
is not a big
startled her.
deal. And then I get home and Haley looks at me like, I'm not doing that. But it's just like one of those moments where you're like, this is why we do what we do. And this is why, like, we celebrate those small moments, because that's huge. Like, that was, my day is complete now. Like, anything can happen today, but I'm good. Like, I
Yeah.
had my moment.
And isn't that incredible when we can like lean into that? I didn't pay attention. Of course, the first time my kids sat up, I was like, yay, they're sitting up. But like, I didn't sit with that for
Yeah.
as long as like it took Raya a long time to sit up and independently and all of that. And the celebration is huge. So it's like a really fun feeling when we can
Hmm.
kind of lean into that and have those things that like we just might have skipped over with our neurotypical kids.
Absolutely. I totally feel that. Like, I look back at the things Noah did, and I really didn't sit there and I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And
Yeah.
then what's next? Like,
And then
but
you move
I
on.
didn't sit
Right.
there and I'm like,
What's next
oh
on
my
the
God,
on
she's
the list
sitting.
or
Like,
thing?
it's huge.
Exactly. Um, I wanted to, because you're a special educator. What grade level do you work with,
I
or
teach
what
middle
age level?
school, 6th through 8th.
Okay. So did you feel, and I feel like probably know the answer. So you as an educator already, stepping into the IEP process with your daughter, did you feel prepared? Did you feel almost like was it harder because of all the things you knew? Like how did that all go? Because you've been through 2 IEP cycles with Haley, right?
Yes. I'm going to say yes to what you just asked me because I felt prepared, but I also felt unprepared. And it's different when it's your child because you kind of go in like defensive,
Yeah.
like I have to defend my kid. But then I went in and they opened up with like all the amazing things she's doing. And it was such a seamless process. And her teachers and school and our district has been truly amazing. So I don't know. I felt almost like I wish it was always this easy. But then I think as a special educator, it really makes me kind of look at the whole process so differently. Like, I think that when I open up a meeting with a parent, like, I only start with positives. And I feel like that's just best practice, like,
Yeah.
always start with positives. And when you deliver anything to a parent, like, deliver it in a way that you'd want to receive it. And, I think that being a special educator and a parent of a child with special needs has truly been so eye opening because, ironically, I feel like I transitioned into special education the year Haley was born. Like, I was an English teacher and I had said to my administration, I'm ready for a change. I think special education would be really good for me. And, lo and behold, Haley was born. And it really, I think, transformed not only my professional life, but my personal life.
Yeah, and that's amazing that you're able to like have that perspective with families that you're working with, as a parent. I'm sure it's
Right.
very reassuring to a parent, even if they don't know it. I'm sure that
Right.
the way that you approach that, is so much better. What are the things that you've learned since, because I didn't realize that you had moved into special ed at around the same time as having Haley. Like have you learned as an educator since you've been in that space versus the typical space, I guess?
I just think that the advocacy I have for my students is so different and crucial. And I think I always would have had that in me, but I just think that I really understand more as a mom, but also as a teacher that like I'm the one with that child during the day. So I'm their voice. If they're, I have to advocate for them and I have to speak up for them. And I think that has been crucial in my career. I think that also, like, kind of circling back to the meetings, I think what has been really difficult is um I guess like trying to not get too personally
Mm.
invested. Like, I feel like sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, like my heart, and I feel like I have to keep that professional hat on. But I do feel that my heart goes into all these meetings now because I'm thinking like my child, and I guess that's good in its own way because it really does allow me to put my heart and soul into what I do. But I think it's hard because you really become like this advocate like in all aspects of your life.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, it's like medical professionals. Like they can't take every patient home with them. They can't,
Right.
get emotionally invested. So, but it's hard to have that balance of not
Right.
then just being emotionless. And,
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
to like put your heart into what you're doing, of course, but you can't let it affect your
Right.
own mental health as well. Um, yeah, I didn't really think about that, how you, you want to probably get emotionally involved in everybody. Um, so I want to hear, I've seen on your social media that you've talked a lot about the advancements they're making with Jordan syndrome, but I also want to know, because when you got the diagnosis, you guys were one of around 200. And I remember you saying years ago that they thought that was in part due to just lack of testing and lack of,
Mhm.
that there were many more people. Has there been change there in diagnosis? And is the community getting larger more because of identification?
I think that, unfortunately we still need better identification, especially when it comes to rare disease. And I see such a push for that in the scientific world. I think that we do have a long way to go. Like I think back when Haley was born, like, I knew right away and I kind of wanted extra testing, but all the testing that was repeated in the NICU was the standard, like, typical things that you would kind of look for. So I
Mhm.
think that's still really lacking. And I'd love to see that, become more of a typical thing, that there's, you know, better testing out there. But I think like the growing number for Jordans and other rare diseases, I really just think is like the awareness that I
Yeah.
think it's just so out there now. And like, I just see that growing and people finding each other. And I don't know. I think that like the Jordan's community has also done a wonderful job in just creating the space for, you know, more advocacy and then extra lucky moms, like just creating these platforms and then these parents join whether they have a child with Down syndrome or a child with, something undiagnosed. I think that when this community is really built for us, then we can find each other. And I don't know. I think I'm skirting
Yeah.
around the issue. I think I guess you asked me more about why the numbers are growing, but I just think like all these communities are so
Yeah.
beneficial. And, I just think that's really helping parents, looking for answers.
When did Jordan syndrome get on the table for you guys? Was it on a panel of testing that was being done, or did the neurologist kind of suspect something? I'm just curious, with being such a rare diagnosis, like when did that pop up?
So, what I've noticed when I've talked to a lot of parents is a lot of them have gone through genomic sequencing, but we actually were given a misdiagnosis at 3 months, and that geneticist, we kind of moved on, and then the neurologist happened to do some extra, blood work, and she said, I think we should just do a little bit more research, and she put on a blood panel, I guess macrocephaly, which means larger head size, and that
Mhm.
somehow picked it up. So I think we're
Mm.
kind of lucky that we found that. And, I think we're lucky we found it so early because I know that there's people still searching. And, of course, Jordan syndrome is on the table for so many people that might not know, but they just don't have the means or, awareness to kind of test for that specifically.
So you had the misdiagnosis, and you would have continued along assuming that diagnosis, or were things not adding up?
So Haley was given the misdiagnosis of achondroplasia, or dwarfism at 3 months. And I kind of walked out of there and I was like, well, he's the expert. But also at the same time, I was like, but he doesn't know my kid.
Yeah.
So I walked out of there. I was like, she doesn't have that. Like, it just wasn't adding up. And I called back like a month and a half later and I was like, I just wanted to know if you got the blood results. And they were like, oh, yeah, she doesn't have it. And
Mm.
at that point, like even with my research, and I was all immersed in, the achondroplasia world. Like I joined all the support groups and I talked to a lot of parents, and I still at that point felt there was something else going on. So that was kind of just like what led us down that path. So I think that we kind of knew at that point, even though she was given that diagnosis, that she really truly didn't have that.
Yeah. And I feel like your intuition has been like one of the strongest, because I know you have said, like, right when she was born, you knew
Yeah.
something was up. And that, when our babies come out, they all look like
Baby.
gangly
Yeah.
and all the things. So the fact that like you knew in your gut that something was, off.
Right. I think
Was
that's
it
a
just
hard.
like looking at her? Was it like just a feeling that you had? Like what was that threw you off kind of?
I wish I could explain it, and I feel like 4 and almost a half years later, I still can't.
Yeah.
I guess it really just is chalked up to a feeling I just kind of knew because I really didn't even see her for that long because they whisked her away to the NICU, and like at that moment, I was like, something isn't right, and I don't know. I guess a feeling.
And your pregnancy, you had no like flags during your pregnancy.
So my pregnancy wasn't totally typical because Haley was actually a twin,
Okay.
and at I want to say pretty early on, we experienced the vanishing twin. Um, but again, going back to that, I said to my husband before they put me, I was like, I think I have twins, and he's like, you absolutely do not have twins, and I was like, I just feel it, and we went to the doctor, and she was like, did you like do IVF? Like, do you have twins in the family? I was like, no, I just like feel it, and she's like, okay, you have twins, and I was like, why am I right? Like,
Yeah.
so but and unfortunately we did lose the twin early on, but so that was kind of the first thing that like didn't sit well with me, and I just felt like otherwise like everything was okay. It was just her 5 month anatomy scan, she wouldn't like turn over. and they brought me back to look at her heart. And I didn't really think too much about it, but then like looking back in hindsight, like I wonder if the low tone like affected her like ability to move, because even when I went back, she hadn't changed positions. So in hindsight, I guess there were some flags, but I think that it just wasn't, picked up by, anyone, because how could they really know?
Yeah, of course. And we kind of skipped over, but talk about some of the trials that are going on, and what they're working on for people with Down syndrome. Talk to me about some of the trials that they're working on and all of the different things, to help people with Jordan syndrome.
So research has been ongoing since Haley was diagnosed. I mean, even before that. And it's incredible, like the super speed that they're moving. We are very close to clinical trials. So I know that that's something down the road that's going to help with, cognitive things. I think we don't truly know what it's going to look like. But I just know that there's like so much promise, and we're excited to see. And just looking at science in general, like what they're doing, and even looking at like COVID and how quickly they moved with that. Like I'm not a science person
Yeah.
at all, but like I love science now.
Yeah.
Just seeing what they can do with it.
And is Jordan's Guardian Angels, the organization that you work with a lot, are they the ones who are kind of championing some of those trials?
Yeah, so Jordan's Guardian Angels has teamed up with a group of researchers and Dr. Chung, who whenever I have an opportunity to speak about her, I call her the Beyonce of the genetics world, because she's truly like a superstar and amazing. And
Yeah.
she's actually the first, other doctor besides the neurologist I had seen with Haley right after her diagnosis. And I just remember leaving her office and I was like, how is this person so incredible? She just, not only like is she just so smart and like working so hard, to help so many people, but she's so down to earth and so kind, and she's just amazing. That was
What
my little
hospital is she out of?
she was actually at Columbia, but now she's at Boston Children's.
Okay. So you guys go there, I'm assuming, every once in a while too.
Yeah, so we're actually going this summer for the conference, and then we'll, be teaming up with Boston Children's to, help them further research by, helping them with different things and different examinations for Haley and other kids who are signed up.
That's awesome. I love
Yeah.
that. I want to talk a little bit about, so your son is 7, right?
Hmm. Yes.
Just talk to me about the sibling relationship. It's always like one of my favorite topics because, as you know, I have 3 older kids. It was, the number one thing that I thought about when we got Raya's diagnosis was, what am I going to do to them? Like that was, the mindset early on, like that I was doing something harmful by, having this child with Down syndrome. I say it in that tone now because it sounds more ridiculous every time I say it. But talk to us about, when you got the diagnosis, he was how old? 4,
He
3,
was 3.
3. Okay.
This
So you
man
probably didn't
was
have some monumental conversation back then, but how have you kind of talked to him over the years about Jordan syndrome and Haley, and just, about their bond in general?
I mean, we want Noah to understand, because not only does he have people in his life who may not understand it, but he needs to be able to understand it. And, you know, how is he going to, and we don't want him to feel like he has to do things for her, but do things with her. And we've really tried to nurture their relationship by finding things that they can do in common, because Noah loves her so much. And I remember after her intensive therapy 3-week session, she was just like sitting one day and playing, and he looks at me and he goes, I didn't know she could sit. And he was just beaming, like so
Oh,
beyond happy. And
yeah.
just to see him be proud of her, I can't even. Like, it's
Yeah.
just, they have such a beautiful, different bond. But, it's not what obviously I pictured for siblings. I pictured them both getting into trouble and pinching each other in car rides. And, it's different, but they're different, and it's amazing. And I've seen Noah become just such an empathetic person. And we were at a park one day, and there was another child who had a walker, and he said, do you think I should go help him? And I was like, that's really sweet, Noah, but I think his parents are there, but why don't you go say hi and see if he wants to play? And he went over to the child, and And I think he just sees life in a different way, which is like, I wish we could teach that to everybody because,
Yeah.
you know, you see it every day in your home, but then when you go out in the world, like my one thing is always like, if you have a question about Haley or about anything, like I'd rather you not like hide and hide
Yeah.
your child and feel like it's not okay. Like ask us, say hi. And that's just one thing that I want Noah to know. And I think he's really truly learned by, being with her and understanding a little bit more about, Jordan syndrome and what it is.
Yeah, and it's why I'm always so grateful for the experience that all of our kids get to have because they, he might listen, he was probably going to be a super kind boy anyway, but maybe he would have not almost had some fear around like why is that child in a wheelchair, a walker, or why is so and so in a wheelchair, or because kids when they don't understand something, they fill in the gaps in some way, and sometimes that being
Hmm.
afraid, you know.
Right.
So he might have had a different like emotional response than to want to help. Like that's
Right.
incredible that that was his first like initial, not like why or what's wrong or not like a negative thought, but just like, oh, should I go and help him? Like that's you can't teach that.
Right. The one thing that say like when you said, how will this affect my other girls? Like I remember Haley was a year old and she had just, been given her, she was having seizures and the doctor called to confirm after testing that she was experiencing what I thought were seizures. And I remember, my husband picked up Noah from daycare and I was crying at home and he walked into me crying and I remember feeling so guilty that he saw me crying and, you know, and then I had a talk with him. He was still little, but I had a talk with him like it's okay to feel sad about things and it's okay to express that. And I want him to know that, like just as a human, it's okay to express how you feel. And I think that like I look back at that moment where I was, very upset about, the phone call and Haley. And I think it was really a learning moment for Noah, but I think for me too, that like, you can't hide, your feelings and emotions. And it's good to talk about, the things that are bothering you. And I think that's helped Noah as he's navigating school. Like this bothered me at school, or, this bothered me that you said this or did this. And, I just think it's been a really big learning process. And I can't believe I'm 37 and I feel like I'm still learning so much from my kids.
I know. That's incredible. It's incredible. And I feel the same way about, at school and kind of navigating and looking at like reframing how we're looking at, somebody acting out or something like that, and there was one time that my daughter was like, because I think I had been driving home for a while, like everybody learns a little bit differently. And, sometimes people like, might need to learn new tools to regulate their emotions and all of that. And I had been kind of driving that home at home. And one of my daughters came home one day and she was just like, she was just complaining about another child. And she's like, I know he might learn differently, Mom. I know he, I know he might need some tools, but it just really bugged me. And I was like, okay, you're allowed to also
Yes.
feel that it's hard.
But
But
that's
I'm glad
amazing.
you've been listening to me.
Yeah, but like using those tools that you've taught her, like
Yeah.
that's so like amazing to see that full
Yeah.
circle.
Yeah. Like I was happy that she wasn't just like, he's a bad kid. Like she was
Right,
like, she was reasoning in her own head, like,
right.
but it was just so, cause I was like, okay, I guess she's heard me, which is, but it's how I, want them to look at the world. Like I want them to understand that like we all do, we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, we all approach things in different ways. And I try to just show that to them, even how the four of them are very different,
Right.
not even Rhea, because Rhea's still a toddler. Like her differences aren't as like, the gap will widen someday, but, um, in just like how I have ones that are better at sports than others and better at acting or singing than others, and just how we all need to like lean into what feeds our soul, what we're good at, and do that. And don't worry about like what everybody else is doing and who's the best at whatever. And,
I love watching your girls do all the things because I feel like they're all into such different things and I don't
such
know how to do it because like you're like at a softball game and then you're at dance and then you're at theater and I'm like, how? How do you do
yeah.
this?
I don't.
So
I don't
you
know
are
how.
incredible.
I don't know how either. It just happens.
But we do it. We figured it out.
But I love like when they're happy doing things that they truly love. And again, I just don't know if this perspective would have been here without having Rhea in my life. But earlier on in parenthood, I used to think that I had to like sign them up for things and they had to be the best at this and that. And I don't care about that, any of that anymore. I'm like, are you theater kid? Cool. Let's do theater. Let's go all in on theater then, and just whatever makes them happy is what they should be doing. And I don't care who else is doing it or not.
I think that's a learned thing as an adult too, because I kind of felt like that with Noah. Like I was trying to like sign him up for everything, and a lot of his friends tried out for travel soccer, and I
Yeah.
truly didn't think he was ready, and he said he wasn't ready, so I didn't push him. He's like, you
Yeah.
know what, next year. And I feel like if that's what he wants to do, he'll do it. If he doesn't, I'm not pushing him. And like you said, like you don't have to keep up with everything. It's just figuring out what makes them happy and unique and special, and
Yeah.
that's a learning thing too, because I think there's a lot of adults that are trying to navigate that. They're like, well, we have to do this, this, and this, but you don't.
No. And especially early on in motherhood, I think you get so caught up in the milestones and, if you go to, like, I remember going to, like a parent group. It was like at a gymboree type of place and sitting around with all the other new moms. And I guess they had like a question of the week that they would like ask people. So they asked how everybody's doing with sleeping. So maybe Sophia was like 6 months old. And they were like, how is everybody doing with sleeping? And I was like the first person to go. So I was like, oh, she's a great sleeper. I was just like stating a fact because she was a great sleeper. From like when she was 6 weeks old, she slept through the night. Like I don't know. She was amazing at sleeping. She's still like, I still have to drag her out of bed. So I went first and I was like, oh, she's a great sleeper, blah, blah, blah. And it was like I got the daggers on me.
Gosh.
And I was like, oh, I didn't know we weren't supposed to tell the truth.
That's amazing.
And like, I didn't, and listen, I understand. Like, there was probably a whole bunch of sleep deprived moms and they're like, shut up with your sleeper. Like, but it was kind of what it started to make me realize like, oh, I don't know if we're all like in this together, like we're not really celebrating each other's wins if we're not also having those wins. Right. And it was really eye-opening to kind of witness that in real time. Nobody really tried to be my friend after that because I was someone who was sleeping. I'm saying in that group, I just, I might have caught everybody on a wrong day, but right. Really, like, we should be able to celebrate what each other, are achieving, the fact that, like, listen, we got through the day and our kids are healthy and happy. So I don't care if we had McDonald's drive-through or a fully, 4-course meal. We're all doing a great job and we should be able to, to celebrate that. So
matters. At the end of the day, whatever we need to do to get there and to get through the days and, keep them happy.
Yep.
That's what matters.
Exactly. What else would you love for us to know about your journey, about Jordan's? Tell us all the things before we wrap up.
I think that if someone is kind of joining the Extra Lucky Moms community, podcast, whatever it is, or just any community in general, there's community out there, and it's really important to reach out, because had I not reached out to you and Jess and, really dove into what I was feeling, I feel like I don't know if I would be advocating as much as I am now. You guys helped kind of facilitate that for me. So I really, truly thank you. I remember, you guys asked me to do a live and I did it. I was I don't know what I was thinking. I was like, sure. It was the day Haley went for like an MRI and I was like, sure, no big deal. But like, I just feel like that helped me kind of feel less alone, because I was like, all right, like there's other people that probably understand this. And I don't know. I think of that day a lot, because it shaped a lot for me, because I was like, I just literally took my child to the hospital and like, she was, out for a little bit and I'm just doing a live, and it helped me because I realized there was huge support out there. So find the support, lean into it. It's there for you. And there's so many people that, are celebrating you, and your wins, and small or big.
I love that. So we do have to end with our signature question. But before that, I want to let everybody know that they can find you on Instagram at Mama Bear for Rare. And is your website the same, Mama Bear?
Yes.
MamaBearForRare.com. Michelle has a blog there and lots of updates around the Jordan syndrome community and Haley. So definitely check that out. You can also find her letter in Dear Mama, Stories of an Extra Lucky Life. So check that out as well. So Michelle, I would love to just know from you, what makes you extra lucky?
I love that. What makes me extra lucky is just having a wonderful community, a beautiful family, and having two beautiful children that are different, unique, and they are what keep me going and keep me advocating. So I feel extra lucky about that.
I love that. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us. Thank you to everybody who listened. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend or on social. It helps us to share the message of this extra lucky life. Thank you so much.